Hi, everybody. This is a chat with Glendora, a program that is dedicated to the belief that when all is said and done, the only thing that really matters is how did you treat others. I have asked my friend Suzanne McCormick to tell you an account. Suzanne, go ahead, honey.
Okay. I want to thank Glendora for giving me this opportunity to express my deep concern for people or what's going on, to reveal through this nightmare that I had and to give them some of the details. I must add that Glendora is doing a great public service by publicizing this very serious matter, since it does apply to many people, not only me, several other people also. There's a saying that there's trillions of dollars have been lost in the transfer of money from one generation to the next. It has been quite upsetting to review this whole nightmare, basically caused, in my opinion, from the mishandling of my husband's estate, namely through Winthrop Rutherford, who was the top trust and estate attorney at the law firm of White and Cates, who drafted my husband's will, including Bankers Trust Company, who was later bought by Deutsche Bank. Now, Win Rutherford actually illegally, as an estate attorney, represented their enduring client, Bankers Trust Company, in a repayment of a loan of my husband's amounting to $500,000 at the start of the estate. Now, because he was the estate attorney and he was representing Bankers Trust Company for this particular purpose, it is known as abandonment, which was explained by two surrogate judges to me. Now, and also $1.5 million, for another example, is another $1.5 million disappeared the last week before death of my husband while he was in a coma, and I at his bedside. Now, William Rutherford was quite vague when I wrote him to tell me where or what it was used for and who received it. They never had a complete answer. Now, Deutsche Bank was purchased by Bankers Trust in June 1999, over 10 years after my husband's death, at which time the children and I still hadn't received our inheritance. When Rutherford stated at executors' meetings, "There is so much money in this estate that it will never run out." Why did he say, "Suzanne, you are the last to receive yours. You can charge interest from the day of death"? Well, I was really taken back, since I was an executor, a main beneficiary, and the wife of my husband's estate, and I was left a good portion of the estate, as he explained, as my husband explained also. They, the bank and White and Case, wined and dined my husband and myself before his death, and had such a cunning attitude, giving one the feeling that they could trust them and that they were professionals. In my case, it turned out that I believe they are professional criminals. My one stepson, a research person, and myself went to the agent at IRS, and he asked if I received my marital deduction. Of course, my answer was no. He said, "Well, you need that for your living expenses." Actually, William Winthrop Rutherford asked me if I would use my personal savings for my living expenses until they got things worked out. Well, of course, this was completely wrong, because my husband wanted me to have $500,000 at the end of 30 days for my living expenses. So, in fact, I was supposed to receive $500,000 after 30 days, as I said, as my husband wanted. Well, after a long delay to this day, I've received around half that amount in two separate payments. Two separate payments, even though shortly after death they liquidated millions in stocks. What and who was that used for? As I understand, Bankers Trust in the Southern District of New York became a convicted federal felon on 3 counts in July 1999 and was purchased by Deutsche Bank as a client of White and Case law firm in June 1999. Consequently, Deutsche Bank, by purchasing Bankers Trust, was subject to 3 federal felons. They say they have the certificate of relief known as get out of the jail free card. However, through our research, we discovered this only applies to state, and their felonies are federal. The New York State parole cannot forgive federal felonies. At one point, there was a judge in Supreme Court by the name of Carla Moskowitz, and she was in charge of a case of mine. This is another situation where they tried to get at me. I was challenging whether the estate had been transferred to the new banking entity, namely Bankers Trust of New York, due to the fact that Bankers Trust Company had become a federal felon and was barred from acting as the fiduciary. Now, before the hearing, former Judge Leo Malonis, now partner with David Kiko of Pillsbury Winthrop Law Firm, who's representing Bankers Trust Company, was walking around very nervously in the court hallway while on the phone getting his marching orders from the masters at White and Case and Bankers Trust. He saw and heard, or we saw and heard, 2 women were in the courtroom as reporters for White and Case. So, of course, they were very upset about this thing that I was bringing up in court about Bankers Trust of New York and who was on the will. Actually, they wanted to fine me and sanction me for raising this issue of whether the nominated Bankers Trust Company had been substituted to the new banking entry Bankers Trust of New York, which is a non-felon entity in the McCormick estate. Now, during the proceedings, Leah Malonis tried to attack me and stated she's trying to put the bank out of business. At that point, Judge Moskowitz said that he had received a letter from the New York State Attorney General who stated he had a personal interest in my case. At that point, Leah Malonis sat down like a lead balloon, and Mr. Kiko tried to put a spin on everything, stating we are not going to have a trust for her, for the estate. Judge Moskowitz then ruled in my favor and denied all sanctions and fines that they were demanding for me by the federal felon Bankers Trust Company and Deutsche Bank. Now then, we figured out that illegally Bankers Trust of New York, the new entity, had already been listed on the permanent letters testamentary in 1989 on my husband's will as executors of my husband's will, they were not in existence until 10 years after the death of my husband. So it was all illegal, what they were doing. Now you have some background, everyone. You have an idea of what I was dealing with before this happened to my homes, which were actually given to me from my husband free and clear of no mortgage. This was a home in Florida was an individual single standing house, a co-op, and they usually called them villas, referred to as a villa, run by the board of directors of the organization. A former white case, we found out that a former white case attorney was working at the villas and representing the villas. We found that out later. Imagine, my enemy was basically working for the villas. So you can imagine the web, all what is connected here. The head of the trust department in New York for Bankers Trust, Deutsche Bank, namely William Wilkie, attended conferences and meetings in Palm Beach area and obviously was very familiar with the people and my villa. In fact, he indicated so. It's all part of the big web. They all kept track of me, where I was living, etc. Now, also, one of my group visited my villa at a time when there was a shareholders meeting and suggested he would attend it with me. At the meeting, we were absolutely speechless when they mentioned that the villa was of interest in buying, that the organization was interested in buying my villa for a clubhouse. I knew nothing about this, and of course, I stopped it. I was shocked. At times, I thought of renting my villa. However, the office gave me a hard time, and they were in charge. Some friends who used my villa, I let some friends of mine use it, and they reported that while at the pool, many people were not owners, but they were renters of other villas. So why didn't they want to rent mine? Incidentally, my husband had a beautiful large added room with a skylight and a fountain built by the Frank Lloyd Wright organization. The manager's office was about 100 feet from my villa, not far. One day I received a surprise phone call from the manager while I was in New York, who gleefully informed me that my house was completely flooded due to a wash machine hose breaking. In my mind, I thought, who was in my house using my wash machine? Since I heard that someone generally has to be using the machine for it to break. However, with a joyful voice, the manager added that it had been running for 5 to 7 days and nights, and that it is a total loss. He was happy about it. I wondered about this since at one time another villa owner who was on the board of directors phoned me to tell me that a previous manager was using my villa when I wasn't there for his intimate pleasures with one of the maids. Then the thought came to me that the manager, that other manager who was having this affair in my villa, asked me to write and give plenty of advance notice as to when I plan on coming to use my villa. Well, I wonder why, huh? So I also questioned why the maintenance people working by the villa didn't see or hear the water running from under my doors. It was very obvious. It was right by the main road to the manager's office. It was only 100 feet down the road, and I was told they always checked the villas when the owner wasn't there. The owner of the land telephoned me to ask me if I was going to sue for negligence. Again, being stunned about everything, I said I didn't know at that time. Now, my insurance company, with much work in writing letters, etc., covered everything. I shopped for many appliances. I met with Steinway in regard to my grand piano, and I also purchased flooring throughout the villa, which was ruined. The water actually was 3 feet up the walls. The contractor that was recommended wanted a deposit of $25,000 to start work, so I sent it. However, my group immediately objected due to the fact that everything should be in writing, since I could not be there in person. So we sent a certified mail overnight delivery to stop payment. We checked it and with the bank, and it had reached the bank in time. However, the contractor or the villa manager must have known someone at the bank because they cashed it immediately. Now, even though I had sent notice was sent in advance, the contractor did no work and kept the $25,000 in spite of my demand to return it. So they planned, Again, they knew this contractor. In fact, I think someone there had recommended it at the villas. Again, I couldn't rent it. Then I managed to get in contact with an unusual female attorney, a very nice person who was up for judgeship, because I was trying to get whatever money they had there for me. She evidently knew about the injustice and the present judge who would not clear money that was due me. As I recall, I worked on it for a couple months, and she got it for me in a matter of 2 weeks at a very reasonable fee. Of course, it was a small amount compared to the net worth of my beautiful villa. And again, Bankers Trust, Deutsche Bank, and White & Case had not given me my inheritance to cover the living expenses. And I did not want to use more personal money going out to attorneys, renting a hotel room, etc., in order to fight the unjust courts. It's more lawfare. Consequently, basically, White & Case and Deutsche Bank were responsible for this whole fiasco. And that's how it happened. It's a whole web that worked together. They have a playbook. However, I personally will not give up. Do you think this is retaliation? I think it is. Since a former White & Case attorney who represents the villa is working there, it was suggested I do leafleting and educational picketing in front of Deutsche Bank in Palm Beach and in New York City. The Palm Beach Post and Daily News had large articles with photos. In fact, Deutsche Bank told the editor of Palm Beach Post, "Don't you dare publish that." And the editor said, "You are in the banking business and we are in the publishing business. So we think you should mind your own business." So, by the way, I got the idea of picketing. This is very interesting. From the former great actress Doris Day. She inspired me to go public. I think many remember her as a great singer, and she sang and acted. Her money at one point was taken from her, and she had a photo taken of her on Park Avenue in New York City going through the garbage cans for food. Since I believe her manager, not sure, but her manager walked away. He did end up giving her money, I believe around millions of dollars. She got publicity and she was successful in getting all of her money. So I thought that was very interesting, and it encouraged me to do my picketing. So now, after the Palm Beach Post photographer left my villa, this is before all the flood happened, I was going out to dinner, and he told me to make sure the house was locked up. I came home. One door was open. I picked up the phone to contact one of my team, or my people in New York, and strangely, a voice came on the phone and said, "This is White & Case. How can I help you?" I was shocked, and I don't think it was a crosswire or an accident. However, I taped the call. But you see, the photographer warned me ahead of time. Now, how did he know that they may be doing this? But that's what they did. This all happened before the flood. Now, I wouldn't want any widow to go through what I've gone through. And while picketing, I did meet people who had a similar situation. Maybe not quite as bad, but they had things that happened to them, and they were very upset. In fact, in New York, one gentleman thanked us since he was going to bring his trust to Bankers Trust and Deutsche Bank for his estate, and was so grateful he didn't go with them since he was informed from our picketing, and thanked us profusely for saving him much time and money. So now in the end, someone got a beautiful home with all my new appliances and tiles sitting in the living room, and they got a good deal at my expense. So this, of course, was a horrible event. And now I think Glendora also wanted me to go through another terrible thing, which was the New York home, which was really the main home with my husband and myself. And that happened in January of 2017. There was a first attempt to invade my home. And as I explain this, I may put a few things in between, but it reminds me of how they treated me and why this kind of thing went on. It was a forcible, terrorizing break-in. I had lived in my home for 50 years, 20 years with my husband until his death, and 30 years by myself. It was left to me by my husband, again, free and clear of any mortgage. One of my research people worked in the house for over 25 years. That way I was not alone. Now, he was working in the basement where all the files were, like an office. And I was on the second floor when I heard a loud banging at the front door and a loud ringing of the doorbell. My assistant then heard a loud noise at the back door where someone was drilling the lock as my assistant went to check. Barry Nesson, by name, was the attorney involved, who was basically responsible for this whole nightmare. I had been fighting the whole matter in the Greenberg Town Court in New York State, and the judge had said in the court openly that he had no jurisdiction over this matter. Barry Nesson was present then. When my assistant went to the back door, he discovered the town constable and two other people drilling the lock to the back door. I was upstairs and heard a loud voices and screaming to my assistant, "Get out, this is not your home. I can mess you up." My assistant yelled, "Show me ID." I understand there was also an undercover policeman present. My assistant then yelled to me, "Suzanne, call the police." Shaking and trembling, I phoned the local police. They came quickly and tried to understand what was going on and told the intruders that they could not do anything because they did not have the proper papers. After much discussion, they all left. I did get a copy of from the department through a FOIL, a Freedom of Information Law request. Now, there was a second attempt to get my house 2 months later, March 22nd. I'll try to explain why this all happened, as Glendora often has said, "Suzanne, explain why this all came about." I want to say basically the White and Case law firm, namely Wynn Rutherford, who drafted my husband's will, also represented the convicted federal felon Bankers Trust, which I've mentioned before, now Deutsche Bank. And they are responsible for having my two homes taken from me. In my opinion, mainly, of course, White and Case was acting in charge as an estate attorney and was greatly responsible for the distribution of the estate along with the bank. Okay. Now, they were not complying with the will, owing me much money, as I stated before. The IRS agent asked me, and I went through this before, did I get my marital deduction? And of course it was no. And what will you live on? And he opened his office for us to look at all the files at the IRS. My first attorney was namely Peter Raymond, the attorney for my stepchildren also, who had not received their inheritance. They hadn't received their inheritance either. However, I was footing the bill of around $200,000, even though I was an executor, a wife, and a main beneficiary. Now, I do understand by law the estate should be footing the bill of an executor, and legal bills are not settled by the surrogate or probate court. I mean, they're settled by the surrogate probate court, but not the Supreme Court, which I can tell later they took over. However, after 3 years, I explained to our attorney that we wanted settlement because we were with him for 3 years. I was spending a lot of money. So he got the children to settle, but left me standing alone and ended up suing me for additional fees, which, according to the retainer, the children are liable for their share of legal fees if I wanted to settle. It really was a setup because my attorney said he could not find a retainer when we had a deposition. He, by hiring an ambulance chaser attorney, Lenny Benowich by name, at a deposition, went after me for additional fees, all contrary to the retainer, which I did not have at that deposition. And I had a young attorney who was not really prepared. So either they got to him or he didn't have the retainer, of course. It really is, the lawyers have a protection racket and they don't really represent their clients to the fullest extent, but are happy to take your money. So they got a Supreme Court judge, namely Louis Barone, to set up their scheme. Actually, this was supposed to be in surrogate court, not Supreme Court, which my lawyers never alerted me to. I hired 2 additional attorneys recommended to me. And through their research, they actually found, my 2 attorneys, that I had overpaid as much as $100,000. After the Supreme Court judge had a hearing, he spoke to my attorneys in his chambers and said, listen, just have Suzanne bring in a bank check of $125,000 and settle this. This is when my attorney said, actually, they owe you $100,000, but just pay this and get it behind you. I objected, and finally they talked me into it. I brought the check, and my one attorney told me that the judge in the back chambers then said, can you get $50,000 more out of her? My one attorney said, I'll report you. The judge said, you do this, you do that, and don't ever come into my court again. My attorney said, I haven't been here for 20 years, and I don't intend to come back for 20 years. Then, unbelievably, you won't believe this, and it was very upset. Then, unbelievably, the judge demanded $260,000 for legal fees and $150,000 interest, totaling $410,000. Plus, the ambulance chaser, Lenny Benowich, was trying to steal whatever he could, since I presume the judge gave him full rights. Attorney Benowich emptied my bank account of Social Security money in Florida of $37,000, plus tried to get into my safe deposit box in New York, which I was warned about by an investigator. So I hired a detective who was armed. So when the attorney arrived at the bank, he said to the detective, who are you? The detective said, well, I want to know who you are. And that ended that, since the bank would not allow anyone to open my safe deposit box unless I was present. This was all illegal. Supreme Court judge had no authority whatsoever. It was a surrogate court matter. Then I understand the dirty attorney, Lenny, went to Charles Schwab to steal more of my money. And Charles Schwab shut him down since he didn't have any legal authority. This whole fiasco cost me at least $1 million with all the interest, everything. Now, Glendora, you can understand that I had to get a quick loan from someone. However, it was at a large interest rate of 12% to cover the $410,000, which I ended up paying for many years, the interest, thinking with continuing lawyers, the estate would finally settle with me. Well, think again. White and Case and Bankers Trust, now Deutsche Bank, are really, I really say they're professional thieves, in my opinion. But I really think so. And I figured they have me in a corner. That's what they figured. They thought we got her now. I was a quiet, demure type. However, my husband knew me and often said, They think we are drowning and we keep popping up. And he told them, be careful of Suzanne, still waters run deep. I might have been quiet, but as you see, I have fight in me. So because of my fight and determination, it finally got to the point where I hired a broker to try to sell my home previously for 3 years. And he only brought one person in the 3 years to look at it. Don't you ask what is going on, who's connected with who, what are they trying to do to me? Finally, as things got more difficult, they thought they would force me out of my home. So White and Case and Bankers Trust are silent thieves, and they work behind the curtain. As you see, I don't think I have to explain further, and I only do this to educate you all how criminal our courts, our judges, and our lawyers and our banks are operating. It's a whole web, and they have a playbook. When I pictured it with my stepchildren and the group, someone came out of the bank stating that they had a playbook which contains a market segmentation of how they deal with estates. They milk, exit, and ignore. In other words, they milk the estate of money, exit it, and then they ignore you. Do I have to say more? The attorneys representing the bank sabotage any settlement attempt. One example is the general counsel of Deutsche Bank saw us picketing outside the bank, and he talked to us and read our leaflet, and he called for a settlement meeting. He said, I would like to settle this. And it was killed. I'm skipping a lot of details here, but it was killed by David Kiko of Pillsbury Winthrop Law Firm, representing the bank, as we were told by Bankers Trust people. Since documents were delivered, they were delivered to the bank by White and Case. But David Kiko killed it. At this time, I couldn't believe what was going on. I was more knowledgeable about music and art than how to deal with these crooks, and they figured that out. However, they were hired to deliver the will, as I'm saying, of course, however, they were hired to deliver the will of my husband that my husband had discussed with them. Oh, yes, and while I was still at my home, they thought they would possibly get me out of my house and send Westchester County Adult Protective Services to my home. Twice, with 2 cars waiting in my driveway to take me away. I thank God that my assistant was present and challenged them, as I also did, and asked them for their card, which they replied they didn't have one. So they did not succeed. Letters were written by my group stopping this scheme of theirs to shut me up in guardianship. That's what they were after. Get the house, take her money, and lock her up. By the way, this is a business all over the country, the whole USA. However, Florida is a cesspool with many wealthy, elderly people residing there. If they can trap you and get a hold of you, as they tried with me in New York State, and get whatever assets you have, plus your home, or whatever, they will then bring you to a nursing home, or I've even heard of a case where the judge evidently made an order that a widow was picked up by the police on the street. Now, this was in New York City, handcuffed and brought to jail. Then they took all her assets and millions of dollars. Oh, yes, a judge can order this. This widow now has a lawsuit, and I might add, it's from quite a famous couple. She was the wife for at least 30 years and a partner in her husband's business. And this was the wife of a famous clothes designer, Oleg Cassini. Look, what's going on today, dishonesty in the judicial courts now. I think of Governor DeSantis in Florida. He should be looking into this serious matter. It's very serious, and a lot of it is going on. This would surely keep him busy. This is a big job. However, who knows? Maybe he doesn't want the conflict because he's an attorney, because this involves attorneys and judges. Clean up the judicial department. The cesspool is huge. So now you all know in this day and age, there is no justice and no law, and judges do as they wish or for whoever lines their pockets. When I told people 25 years ago about my husband's estate and the criminality, no one wanted to believe me. Now it's coming to light. They flagrantly violated the laws. They continually abused me and are attempting to rape me financially. One must be also grateful, I must say, to Donald Trump, who actually stirred up the waters and made people aware of the criminality, because it's very big today. So if they can go against the law and take papers from a former president, of course, in his private residence, and Rudy Giuliani's apartment and others, and by tearing through their apartments. Now, Giuliani was a New York state attorney and a former mayor of New York City, a very successful one. And they're taking what they want. Don't you think that they can do whatever they want to you and me? Of course they can. If your enemy gets to the judges, what chance have you got as a private citizen? You know, we must pray for all this, please. And I think we better wake up. They are stealing from us, and they cry like babies if someone reveals their secret. Look how they retaliate on me. I surely can give many examples of our judicial system as a broken, judicial, corrupted. Charles Dickens wrote a book in 1850 titled The Bleak House Story, which changed British law. Now I can say the American Bleak House Story in 2023. Look, the law secretary, namely Robert DeBella, now a Supreme Court judge, mind you, was a lawyer to Judge Scarpino in the surrogate court at the time when I was there. He called a meeting with me, with my attorneys and others, including me. We were all there. DeBella asked me, he said, he asked me what I wanted. I hesitated and said justice. And he responded and said, there is no justice in this court. Wow, that's some comment to make. And then, by the way, my attorney never discussed this with me, and my attorney said, he means money, Suzanne. So Robert DeBella, the law secretary, said, would you want me to speak to the attorneys for the bank in the other room? And I said, yes. Of course. So he did, and he came back and said, they do not want to speak to you. Now tell me, I thought, who's in charge, the bank or the court? It's like the fox in charge of the hen house. Shouldn't the court be in charge, stating they must speak to me? I'm here, they must speak to me. I guess my word justice got them a little mixed up, and they didn't want to talk about a just settlement. Now, Glendora, I'll finally explain what went on to throw me out of my home. My husband purchased his home from the original owner, namely Elizabeth Gordon Norcross, the editor of House Beautiful magazine. She was also a business friend of Frank Lloyd Wright, who I'm sure he was a visitor of her home often, and of course many of his architectural ideas were incorporated into her ideas. She used the house for entertaining and advertising, as my husband and I followed through by having business dinners and benefits. And, Glendora, I remember you stayed at my house, and you were also a guest at one time. As I recall, you interviewed me then at that time about the estate. And that goes back, some years, of course. And you saw, too, it had a beautiful courtyard. It was a home that took the outside beauty into the home. And my husband discussed the fact that he wanted me to live there until my death, and that there would be plenty of money to accommodate that wish. He said one month before death, the estate was over $100 million. Of course, it would be. That would be if White and Case would handle it as professionals should, but they didn't. So my husband appointed 5 executors thinking I would be protected. As you may guess, this didn't happen either. They got to the executors, all kinds of deals went on. One resigned shortly after he got in. So after death, my one stepson asked when Rutherford of White and Case, at the funeral, mind you, what the estate was worth. And he said around $47 million. Well, what happened to the other $50 million plus? As I said at executors meeting with Win Rutherford, he stated, there is so much money in this estate that it will never run out. So what happened? And Suzanne, you are last to get yours. Well, why is that? But another example I just want to give of the treachery of these people. I got in the mail joint income tax refunds from before the date of death from the IRS, and they were made out to Suzanne and Edmund McCormick. And when of course, I let the bank know, the one seller there was always very nice. Their pleasing personality is very misleading. So I, of course, let him know, and he said, well, just mail them to us because we want to make a note of them, and we'll refund you. Well, guess what? Of course, they even had their name added to future checks. Besides Suzanne and Edmund McCormick, they added their own name. I never received any of it. In fact, future checks, as I say. And however, we have a copy of the check, so that's proof there. I couldn't believe what I heard with all this. I was speechless. I was lost when my husband left me most of the estate, as he explained. And I said, what happened to the other money? I'm just kind of reviewing some of these things. I have questioned things, and how with all their winning and dining, whining and dining before my husband's death, they get a person into a trusting and believing mode. That's what they do. They wine and dine you and get you believing in them, and we'll definitely take care of you, and we'll handle everything, and don't worry. They have such a cunning attitude. Right away after my husband's death, they suggested I should sell both my homes and the art collection, which was not what my husband intended for me. Of course, now you say, why didn't I speak up? I say I thought they were top in their field, and they knew what they were doing, but I didn't always agree with them. Of course, remember, the bank is a convicted federal felon because of the subject of unclaimed funds, by the way. And as I stated, certificate of relief from the state of New York does not give them a free pass, since it applies to state but not federal. I am so upset about our whole system where attorneys are threatened if they reveal certain subjects, such as these kind of things that I'm speaking about. Letters testamentary is a very important subject, since the subject with research, it takes you very deeply into their criminality, and one sin leads to another. They listed an entity, namely Bankers Trust of New York, as an executor in the letters testamentary on my husband's will, in his letters, my husband's, which was not in existence until 10 years after his death. The will nominated Bankers Trust Company. He wanted Bankers Trust Company. Again, they avoided the will. So they put down Bankers Trust of New York. Now, this makes everything they did in my husband's estate null and void. They figured no one would discover this. Even my attorneys, if they did, they wouldn't admit it. They were told to keep quiet. Right. I have research people who are trained in this area, which really annoys them. In fact, one attorney said, will you work for me? Because he knows how to find these things. As I understand, they have and had no legal standing. It's a fraud on the court, and it's a fraud by the court. So we also checked with retired judges and attorneys who do not want to be identified because they are afraid also. It's a very serious subject. Now, we made public the letters, testamentary, and file papers in 2005 when we discovered this. My attorneys and the judge never wanted to reveal this, and the cover-up goes on. So, Glendora, of all these events, built up to the illegal throwing me out of my home. They just keep retaliating, and so here it starts. Here's the second attempt, if I don't get sidetracked again, to throw me out of my New York home. Yeah. Remember, White and Case said there's so much money. I'm not going to keep repeating it, but I do. There's so much money that it will never run out. And Suzanne, you're last to get anything, but you know what? You can charge interest from the date of death. What a line. They sure got that out of the playbook. So now I'm going to, by the way, I have to admit, I'm going to be 88 years old today. I was 81 years when they legally threw me out of my home as follows. They arrived with 3 huge moving vans. Very frightening, let me tell you. It appeared policemen of Westchester County came to my back door dressed in plain street clothes. It reminds one of a communist country, doesn't it? By the way, an attorney friend I knew telephoned the county office and reminded them that they do not have the required legal papers. They said they do not need them. We don't need them. My assistant went to the back door again, seeing them trying to break in. It was snowing and raining at 32 degrees. I'd say this is definitely elder abuse coming. Is this America? If one can have the vision, I was a representative for the United States. Here I go off, but I was a representative for the United States to the Soviet Union. And I had been given the Peace Award from the UN after one of my performances. Not that that excuses anyone. I'm not saying that. But however, I'm trying to say I'm not someone who does not go by the law. White and Case and Bankers Trust were not going by the law by robbing my inheritance. No, I am not exaggerating. They are professional silent thieves, and it's psychological warfare. It's easy to see now. They figure if you hire an attorney and spend millions, basically they figure they can drain you. So you are stuck in the mud. They want to bleed you to death. As I say, it's lawfare. So, one time when we inquired about publicity, the Gannett paper in White Plains years ago immediately said to the person representing me, does she have any money to fight? You see what they're after? I have spent way too much on legal fees, and as I understand, being a wife, executor, and main beneficiary, my legal fees should be an estate expense. Now, the Greenberg court judge did say to me in court, I have no jurisdiction over your matter. They then forced their way into my home and asked my assistant, are you a tenant? He answered yes. One of the police pulled him out by his right arm without any warning, causing him to be injured and bleeding. When he objected, he was told, objecting will not do you any good, and not to bother calling the Dobbs Ferry police because they have already alerted them. Then the police in street clothes asked my assistant, did you take any documents from here? My house was filled with boxes of documents in every room, 11 rooms, and the basement and garage. My assistant answered, no, most of them have been scanned. Tell me, what was their interest? At one point during my case, we were told my estate records were destroyed by the court. When we requested reviewing them at the court, the new clerk scurried around trying to gather papers due to our investigating. They then demanded that I could not see everything, and they had another court lawyer watch us as to what we were looking at and copying. Now, what were they hiding? They had no right to do this since these are public records, and I'm an executor and wife and main beneficiary. Now back to my home. They threatened my assistant with an arrest if he tried to enter the dwelling. They then came up to my bedroom demanding that I hurry and get dressed and get out of my home. They kept saying, hurry up, hurry up. They never showed me papers or ID. As I was fuming and throwing things in a suitcase, they said, be sure you take all your jewelry and medication. I said, don't worry, you're not getting my jewelry and I do not take medication. As Patrick said, don't tell him anything. I was so upset that I yelled, someday you will be sorry for this. Afterwards, of course, I thought these people are so sick that they only get joy out of my anger. It's only another job to them. Since later they threatened me saying, we could throw everything out on the lawn. Many of my designer clothes, of course, and furniture were missing. I am a Steinway artist and very worried about my Steinway concert grand piano my husband bought for me when we got married. They said, don't worry, we know how to move pianos, and they would not allow me to watch. Well, it was raining and snowing. Of course, they pulled it out. Who knows how long they let it sit in the rain. I'd love to create with fashion and music. And, of course, I had, Chanel and Burberry and some things I really liked very much. And they were gone. They obviously took them, I guess. And a Philip Laverne coffee table my husband bought, no place to be found. Kendall dining table, it had a heavy, heavy glass top. Maybe Glendora remembers, but the base that held the glass is nowhere. What kind of vicious act is that? A $20,000 item at that time, 50 years ago? What can one do without the base of a table? Kendall Furniture was one of my sponsors in Michigan for my music, and it was a Kendall furniture piece. They actually threw things in boxes. There was no labeling. One shoe would be in one box. I wouldn't be able to find the other shoe. Who knows? It was just all thrown in, nothing labeled. Damp from the rain and snow. My husband had a very valuable library, and it's completely ruined. It was all the books were, warped or damp, terrible. They're not usable. And they were art books. I had books of my own. I had valuable music, transcripts of Gershwin music. I had original scores of the Chicago Symphony. I mean, we had such valuable things that we treasured, and I wanted to take time someday to look at a lot of these things in the books. And actually, the curator of Yale University wanted the collection of books if I ever didn't want them or I gave them away or whatever. So it's destroyed, completely destroyed. Many people can't believe this when they read about this. However, I have learned that there are many people that were lied to by the courts and lawyers, and they're enduring crime. Basically, as I say, they wine and dine these people or whoever, like my husband's estate, and they get control. And basically, they rob it. And I know someone who was asked, actually by Wynn Rutherford, to introduce them to wealthy people, to introduce him to wealthy people on Park Avenue. Why? She thought he just wanted to meet them. No, he wanted to meet them to get their estate. So how would we really realize that they were professional thieves? It didn't matter that I was a guest. Also, this is another thing. I was a guest of Evard Shavanovsky, the foreign minister of the Soviet Union, when I went there. I represented the United States. And later, he was the president of Georgia, Russia. While giving interviews and concerts, including making a film that, as I understand, I got first place at the Moscow Film Festival. I was invited then to perform for all leaders and presidents of the European countries, headed by Wayne Smith and former President Jimmy Carter, who would accompany me with his wife and others, which I had to turn down. They gave me a year to think about it. They said, please, Suzanne, we want you to go. I said, no, I've got this estate. They've been doing things while I'm gone, and I just can't I wouldn't be able to concentrate properly. So I had to turn it down due to all this that was going on in the estate. When I saw there were bad things going on while I was gone for a month. 132 PBS stations had shown my performance in Mexico City, and I performed in Carnegie Hall, Whale Hall, and I did concerts in Rome and London. Listen, what I'm trying to say is this is the beginning of destroying my career. I was trying to build a career which my husband wanted me to continue, and it's a lot of work. And it was just, I knew it was going to be destroyed at that point. This broke my heart. These matters took all my attention and time to picketing, and then we picketed, and protested, and that takes time. It was a lot of work. We had to make professional signs. We had to make leaflets, get the facts down straight. It was a lot of work. And it was suggested by my group. Actually, one man was a politician, and Patrick, a friend of the group, knew him, and he suggested firmly that I should picket. This took all my time, and of course, expenses started with attorneys, and just the opposite from what my husband wanted me to continue with the rest of my life. This took all my attention, and please believe me, they would not care about me, and they wouldn't care about you or anyone else. They don't care. It's the dollar bill they're after. I surely would not want another widow or anyone else to go through what I have, and still fighting at my age of 88. Let me see. I have in my notes that I'm trying to follow. Of course, I had publicity. Fortunately, as we did the picketing and publicity, we got some good publicity in Forbes, Fortune, Worth, New York Post, Newsday, Palm Beach Post, Daily News, just to name a few. And then settlement attempts. There was one great settlement attempt. I might have mentioned this before, but it was Trolling Link, the general counsel. Yes, I think I did mention it before, and it was sabotaged by David Kiko. He killed it. And that man really, and later on we found out he left the bank that very shortly later after that. So, now, many items were missing in my house, and I couldn't find the legs and the pedals to my beautiful piano. Can you imagine? Until I think 6 years later, way back in the huge storage room, I found them in the bottom of a huge box. Up to date, I have not found my Russian posters, which I had framed and hanging in my music room. I can go on and on. Yes, this is what I call malicious and retaliation. And it's I don't know. It was just so upsetting. Even I can't say, but Win Rutherford at one time, he's in the social register. I don't know if he's still in there. He really shouldn't be in there. These people are actually criminals. When you said there's so much, when he said there's so much money in this estate that it will never run out, he surely demanded to be paid, didn't he? And who knows how much was involved in that? I'm sure he got plenty of money out of the estate. And the fact he said you are last to get anything. He planned that from day one. I think he planned this before death, frankly. It cost me into the millions, and I think when $1.5 million disappeared before my husband died, it makes me think they were planning this, of course, way back before he died. And the IRS agent was quite upset with White and Case and Bankers Trust, and he did say he asked one of my group, he said, "Do you see that door out there?" And he said, "Yeah, why do you say that to me?" He said, "Look, I'm going to stop them when they come in that door. I'm going to give them a hard time." So my husband was betrayed too. My husband and I were betrayed. at one deposition, this is very interesting, when Rutherford was there and another attorney who was the top of the attorneys, I guess, at White and Case, William Schaefer, he was there playing with his toys. He took his suitcase out and he was throwing toys up in the air and down. Why? To distract anyone having the deposition. Now, my lawyer should have said, stop that. You can't do that to her. And probably I should have stood up and left the deposition. But, you think of these things afterwards, because at the time you think, what's wrong with this guy? What is he doing? They were really bad actors who abandoned the estate to represent their client, Bankers Trust, now Deutsche Bank, and they're convicted federal felons. So I keep repeating it. When I filed complaints, I also filed complaints, by the way, to the disciplinary committee of the Bar Association and part of the incest club, really, with lawyers. So we checked what happened, and they couldn't find my complaint. So it went into the burn bag. What good is the Bar Association? It's the same thing. It's a whole club with all the lawyers in it. So now the U.S. Labor Department requires Deutsche Bank must obtain exemptions under the law to deal with any ERISA pension fund matters. It is a criminal thing that they did, and that they are definitely felons. So, because the certificate of relief will not cover them. But no one knows about these things. People do not know. I don't even know if some of the attorneys know. Now, if they weren't not involved in any criminal activity, would exemptions from the U.S. Labor Department be necessary? No. So obviously they're guilty. I'm sorry, but the truth will come out. The chickens are coming home to roost. This has been going on for decades. It's finally getting to the surface. They have a good money game going on. It's organized crime. Again, I say we must pray. Yes. To end my story, a friend finally, with my house, as I was outside, asked me, said that I could stay at her home until I found an apartment. My home has been vacant for 6 years now. I have no justice, no closure, and I want to be made whole. My good friend Glendora suggested I do this for some time now. It's all based upon my personal knowledge, conclusions, opinions, facts, and the record. Again, don't forget prayer. If there's no justice, there's no peace. Glendora has the saying, always told me, when all is said and done, the only thing that really matters is how do you treat others. And we can do all things through God who strengthens us. Glendora and I both stand for justice. Who can stand against us? Please pray. I hope many people will be alerted as to what's really going on in this country and probably the world. And it's not, I thank Glendora for standing behind us. Since you understand, she understands the unjust system. She knows about it. They have betrayed us like Judas in the Bible, who was sold out. It's a breach of trust. Now, I want to wish all the best to everyone. Of course, it's not just limited to one bank and one law firm. There are many others involved and many other people. And it can happen to anyone. So this gives people an idea. And maybe if you are involved in anything like this, it will give you some ideas of what they do and how they do it. And they catch you off guard. I know a lot of people that are very intelligent, and they've been taken in when the judge said, well, you don't get all your money. I'll give you $1 million, that's it. And he didn't take it. He said, no, that's not correct. So, I know other people have been treated this way. So I think only God knows, and he's in charge, and he will judge us, and we must pray very diligently for our country, and that we get a leader who will run it and go after these type of things. I want to thank you very much, Glendora, for this this chance for me to reveal this to everyone.
Suzanne McCormick, thank you.
Okay, I'm glad you took the time for this lengthy thing. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, you're welcome. I know. Okay. This is the end of it.
5, 4, 3, 2.